What happens when the perfect marriage reveals a perfect lie? For Helen, her life was a modern fairy tale, a whirlwind romance with billionaire Rose Croft, a lavish Manhattan penthouse, and a baby on the way. The 20-week ultrasound was supposed to be a celebration, a peek at the new life that would complete their gilded world. But in the hushed, sterile room, surrounded by images of their unborn child, Rose uttered 7 words to the doctor that shattered everything. 7 words that twisted a moment of joy into a waking nightmare. This isn't just a story of divorce. It's the story of how a mother's deepest love was forged in the fire of an unthinkable betrayal. The air in the waiting room of Weill Cornell Imaging on the Upper East Side was thick with the scent of antiseptic and muted joy. It was a place of quiet miracles where Manhattan's elite came to get their first glimpse of their heirs. Helen Croft sat with her hands resting protectively on the gentle swell of her stomach, a serene smile playing on her lips. At 32, she possessed a classic, understated beauty that was often captured in the society pages of Vogue and Tatler. But today, her glow was entirely her own. It was the radiant, unfiltered happiness of a woman about to see her child for the very first time. Her husband, Rose Croft, sat beside her. To the outside world, Rose was a titan, a man who had carved a digital empire from nothing before the age of 40. His face, often stern and focused on the covers of Forbes and Wired, was softened today by a rare, unguarded tenderness. He held Helen's hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. He had draped his Loro Piana cashmere coat over the back of his chair and was scrolling through emails on his phone, a habit he couldn't break, but his attention was divided. Every few seconds, his gaze would flick from the screen to Helen's bump, and a small, almost imperceptible smile would touch his lips. Their life was by any measure perfect. They lived in a sprawling duplex overlooking Central Park, a palace of glass and steel where priceless art hung on the walls, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of the city. They owned a small piece of. Their romance had been the stuff of legends, the brilliant self-made billionaire and the thoughtful art history graduate who had met by chance at a Sotheby's auction. He had been captivated by her quiet intelligence, a calming port in the storm of his high-stakes world. She in turn had found a surprising gentleness beneath his formidable exterior. But their gilded cage had one empty room. For 3 years they had tried for a child. 3 years of precisely timed cycles, hushed consultations with the best fertility specialists in the world, and the slow, creeping despair that came with each negative test. Rose, the man who could bend markets to his will, was powerless against his own biology. The diagnosis had been a blow to his pride male factor, infertility severe and irreversible. Helen had been his rock. She had reassured him that he was the only man she wanted, that a family was something they would build together, no matter the path. So they had chosen another path. An anonymous egg donor carefully selected from a portfolio of brilliant, beautiful women, and a sperm donor with a lineage as impressive as it was sterile. It was a clinical, transactional process, but for Helen it was simply the mechanics of building her family. The baby growing inside her was hers in every way that mattered. It was her body nurturing it, her heart that beat in time with its own, her love that was already an inextricable part of its being. Mrs. Croft, a kindly sonographer named Maria, called her voice soft. Helen's heart gave a little flutter. Rose immediately pocketed his phone, all business forgotten, and helped her to her feet as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. Inside the dimly lit room, the air was cool. Helen lay back on the examination table, her sweater pulled up to reveal the taut skin of her belly. Rose sat on a stool beside her, his eyes fixed on the large monitor on the wall. Maria was warm and professional, her voice a soothing murmur as she squirted the warm gel onto Helen's skin. "All right, let's see what we have here," Maria said, gliding the transducer across her abdomen. The screen flickered to life, a grainy monochrome world of shadows and light. And then, there it was. A tiny perfect silhouette. A head, a spine curled like a question mark. The unmistakable flutter of a heart beating at a ferocious, life-affirming pace. Tears welled in Helen's eyes, spilling silently down her temples. "Oh, Rose," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She reached for his hand without taking her eyes off the screen. Rose's grip was tight, his knuckles white. He was speechless, his gaze locked on the miracle before them. This was it, the culmination of all their hopes, their quiet grief, their shared determination. Maria moved the probe, her commentary a gentle tour of their child's developing body. "Here are the 4 chambers of the heart. Beautiful. And the kidneys look great. Let's see if we can get a good look at the face." She expertly manipulated the transducer, and the image shifted. A tiny profile emerged from the grey ether. A nose, a pair of lips, a perfectly formed forehead. "He or she is a little bit shy today," Maria chuckled, trying to get a clearer angle. Another doctor, a senior perinatologist named Dr. Albright, had entered the room to review the findings, a standard procedure for high-profile patients. He stood observing with a professional smile. "Everything looks perfectly on track, Mr. and Mrs. Croft." Dr. Albright confirmed, his voice calm and authoritative. "You have a very healthy baby in there." Helen's joy was a physical thing, a warmth that spread through her entire body. She laughed through her tears, turning to share the moment with her husband. "Did you hear that, Rose? Perfect." But Rose wasn't looking at her. His face, which had been so full of wonder moments before, was now a pale, rigid mask. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes were still fixed on the screen, but the tenderness was gone, replaced by something cold and unreadable. "Rose?" Helen asked, her smile faltering. He didn't respond. He seemed to be in a trance, his knuckles straining in her hand. "Doctor." Albright, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Croft, is everything all right?" Rose finally blinked, tearing his gaze from the screen to look at the 2 doctors. His voice when he spoke was low and steady, yet it sliced through the sacred silence of the room with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. "It's not her baby," he said, his eyes flicking momentarily towards Helen before settling back on Dr. Albright. "She's not the real mum." The words hung in the air, grotesque and nonsensical. Maria's hand froze on the transducer. Dr. Albright's professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. For a heartbeat, Helen couldn't process it. It was as if he had spoken in a foreign language. The sounds were there, but the meaning was lost, impossible. "What?" She managed a strangled whisper. "Rose, what are you talking about?" He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes would haunt her for the rest of her life. There was no confusion, no sign that he had misspoken. There was only a chilling, absolute certainty. He pulled his hand from hers, the sudden absence of his touch as shocking as a physical blow. He turned back to the stunned medical staff. "I just wanted it on record, that's all." Dr. Albright cleared his throat, his training kicking in. "Mr. Croft, perhaps we can discuss this in my office. There seems to be some confusion." "There's no confusion," Rose stated flatly. He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke shirt. The tender husband of a few moments ago was gone, replaced by the ruthless CEO. "We're done here." He looked down at Helen, who was staring up at him, her face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. The tears of joy had turned to ice on her cheeks. The love of her life was looking at her as if she were a stranger, a surrogate, a vessel. Not a mother. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the ultrasound room, leaving behind a shattered silence and the frantic echoing beat of his child's heart on the monitor. The silence in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was a living entity. It was heavier than the armored doors, more suffocating than the city smog outside the tinted windows. Helen sat pressed against the supple leather of her seat, as far away from Rose as the opulent confines would allow. She stared unseeingly at the blur of Park Avenue, her mind a maelstrom of his words replaying them on a torturous loop. "She's not the real Mom." Every syllable was a fresh cut. He hadn't shouted it in a fit of rage. He had stated it as a fact with a cold, clear precision that denied any possibility of misinterpretation. It was a calculated detonation designed to inflict maximum damage in the most vulnerable of settings. Rose sat opposite her. His long legs crossed his posture, infuriatingly relaxed. He was staring at his phone again, his thumb making lazy, scrolling motions over the glass. He hadn't spoken a single word since they'd left the clinic. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the bomb he had just thrown into the center of their lives. He had simply instructed their driver, Mikhail, to take them home, his voice as devoid of emotion as if he were ordering a stock trade. Helen's shock was beginning to curdle into a rage so potent it made her tremble. Her mind raced, trying to find a logical anchor. Was this a psychotic break? A sudden, inexplicable unraveling of his mind. But she had seen the look in his eyes. It wasn't madness. It was something far more terrifying. It was purpose. The car glided to a silent stop in the private subterranean garage of their building. The engine cut out, and the silence deepened, becoming unbearable. Mikhail, ever the professional, remained in his seat, his eyes fixed forward. Finally, Rose pocketed his phone. "Helen," he began, his voice calm, measured. "Don't." She snapped her own voice, sharp and brittle. It was the first word she had spoken. "Don't you dare say my name." She didn't wait for him. She threw open her door and practically fled to the car, her movements clumsy with fury. She could feel his eyes on her back as she strode towards the private elevator, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the polished concrete. She jabbed the button for the penthouse, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The doors slid shut just as he reached them, and for a blessed few seconds, she was alone. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a glass box rising through the heart of the building. Helen stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls. A pale, wild-eyed woman stared back, her hand clamped over her belly, as if to shield her child from a threat that was already inside the gates. The doors opened directly into their foyer, a vast, marble-floored space dominated by a colossal Gerhard Richter painting. The beauty of it, the sheer expense and perfection of their curated life, felt like a mockery. This wasn't a home. It was a stage set, and she had just discovered her part was a lie. She walked through the cavernous living room, past the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Central Park, and went straight to the bar. Her hands shook as she poured a glass of water, the crystal tumbler clinking against the spout of the dispenser. The elevator chimed its arrival. Rose strode in his face, unreadable. He loosened his tie as he walked towards her. "We need to talk," he said. "Talk." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "I think you did all your talking at the clinic, Rose. In front of doctors who now think I'm what? Some kind of paid surrogate, a mentally unstable woman you've tricked. It's not like that," he said, stopping a few feet from her. "It's complicated." "It's complicated," she repeated, her voice rising. "You humiliated me. You delegitimized me. You looked at the image of our child, a child I am carrying inside my own body. And you told a group of strangers that I'm not its mother. What part of that is complicated? It seems brutally simple to me. I was trying to protect you, to protect us. Protect me from what? From joy. From the one thing we've wanted for years. How in any sane version of reality does what you did in that room constitute protection?" She was shouting now, the sound swallowed by the sheer volume of the apartment. "You have to trust me, Helen. Trust you." The question was incredulous, laced with the poison of betrayal. "Trust is a foundation, Rose. It's the ground you build a life on. You just took a jackhammer to it. You stood there cool as ice, and you disowned me as this baby's mother. Trust is the last thing you have the right to ask for." He took a step closer, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I can't explain everything right now, but I had to create a record, a legal ambiguity." The word legal struck her like a physical blow. This wasn't a moment of insanity. It was a move, a play in a game she didn't even know she was in. Her mind, sharp and analytical, began to connect horrible, jagged pieces. The coldness, the precision, the phrase, "on record." The rage that had been a hot, blinding fire now cooled into something harder and more dangerous clarity. She looked at the man she had loved, the man she thought she knew, and saw a stranger, a strategist, a man who moved human beings around like chess pieces. And in that moment, she understood. He wasn't protecting her. He was positioning himself for what she didn't know. But she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it was against her. She set her water glass down on the granite countertop with a deliberate, sharp click. Her decision was instantaneous, forged in the crucible of his betrayal. If this was a game, she would not be a pawn. "Get out," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. He looked taken aback. "What, Helen? This is my home." "It's our home," she corrected him, "and you have just defiled it. You are not sleeping here tonight. Take a bag. Go to the Carlisle. Go to one of your other dozen properties. I don't care. But you are not staying here. Don't be ridiculous. If you are not out of this apartment in 30 minutes, Rose, I will call building security and have you removed. Do you really want to add that to our little drama?" He stared at her, truly seeing for the first time the iron resolve in her eyes. The soft, gentle Helen he knew was gone. In her place was a woman he did not recognize, a woman who looked at him with something akin to hatred. He saw she was not bluffing. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Fine. We will talk in the morning when you've calmed down." "Don't count on it," she said, turning her back on him. She listened to his footsteps recede towards their bedroom, suite, the sound of drawers opening and closing. She stood perfectly still, her hand once again resting on her stomach. Her heart was no longer racing with anger, but beating with a slow, steady drum of purpose. He thought he was playing chess, but he had fundamentally misunderstood the game. This wasn't about property or legal ambiguities. This was about her child. The moment she heard the front elevator chime his departure, she moved. She walked into Rose's sprawling office, a room that had always intimidated her with its sleek masculine energy and cutting-edge tech. She sat down in his chair, the leather still warm from him, and unlocked her laptop. She didn't search for therapists or marriage counselors. She typed Best Divorce Attorney, NYC, Sole Custody. The name that came up repeatedly, lauded in forums, and whispered about in elite circles was Harriet Cole. Known as the shark in the Chanel suit, Cole was legendary for her discretion, her ferocity, and her unblemished record in high-asset, high-conflict divorces. Her specialty was protecting mothers. Helen found the number for her private practice. It was well past 9 p.m., but she dialed it anyway. She expected an answering service, a voicemail. Instead, after 2 rings, a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. Harriet Cole. Helen took a deep, shuddering breath. My name is Helen Croft, she began, her voice gaining strength with every word. My husband is Rose Croft, and I need to file for sole custody of my unborn child. Tonight. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, not of surprise, but of assessment. Tell me everything, Harriet Cole said. And Helen did. 2 days later, Rose Croft was presiding over a quarterly board meeting in a glass-walled conference room on the 80th floor of One World Trade Center. Below him, the city sprawled, a kingdom he had in many ways conquered. Inside the room, the atmosphere was deferential. Men and women, twice his age, with pedigrees stretching back to the Mayflower, hung on his every word. He was dissecting market projections with his usual incisive brilliance, his demeanor cool and commanding. He had called Helen twice, leaving voicemails that were a strange mix of paternalistic concern and frustration. He assumed she was being emotional, that she would eventually succumb to the logic he was so sure he possessed. It was his personal assistant, a hyper-efficient young man named Carter, who interrupted the meeting, something he was under strict instructions never to do. Carter entered silently and placed a single thick manila envelope on the polished mahogany table, beside Rose's right hand. He didn't look at Rose, but at a point on the wall just beyond him. This just arrived by courier, Mr. Croft. Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. The sender said it was urgent. Rose glanced at the envelope. There was no sender's address, just his name and the address of Croft Enterprises, typed in a simple professional font. With a flicker of annoyance at the interruption, he slit it open with a silver letter opener. As he pulled out the sheaf of documents, the blood drained from his face. The bold, stark heading at the top of the first page seemed to leap out at him. Petition for dissolution of marriage. And underneath that, even more damning motion for sole legal and physical custody. The room fell silent. The board members watched as their infallible leader, the man who could anticipate global market shifts months in advance, was struck dumb by a piece of paper. He scanned the pages, his eyes devouring the dense legal text. He saw the accusations, the cold, factual recounting of the events at the ultrasound clinic, framed as evidence of his unstable and cruel behavior and his intent to deny maternal parentage. And at the bottom he saw the name of the petitioner's counsel, Harriet Cole. A low, guttural sound escaped Rose's lips, a mix of a gasp and a curse. Harriet Cole. He knew the name. Everyone in his world knew that name. You didn't hire Harriet Cole to negotiate. You hired her to annihilate. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped backward. The meeting is over, he announced, his voice tight with a controlled fury, that was far more frightening than any shout. He didn't wait for a response, simply strode out of the room. The papers clutched in his hand, leaving his entire board staring in stunned silence. Back in the leather and chrome sanctuary of his office, he slammed the door shut and finally let the mask drop. This wasn't an emotional outburst from a hormonal wife. This was a declaration of war. A precisely executed, brutally effective first strike. Filing for sole custody of an unborn child was an extreme, aggressive move. And to do it through Harriet Cole, Helen was trying to sever him from his own child before it was even born. His first call was to his own lawyer, a man who was the yin to Harriet Cole's yang Marcus Thorne. Thorne was an old-world corporate litigator, a silver-haired patriarch who operated out of a book-lined office on Wall Street. He specialized in hostile takeovers and corporate defense, viewing every problem, including divorce, as a strategic negotiation. "She's retained Harriet Cole," Rose spat into the phone as soon as Thorne answered. There was a moment of silence on the line. "Well," Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "that is unfortunate. It would seem your wife is not interested in an amicable settlement." "Amicable?" "She's filed for sole custody. Marcus. She's claiming I'm unstable. She's using my own words against me. The words you spoke at the ultrasound clinic, the ones you told me about," Thorne asked, a hint of "I told you so" in his tone. "I did advise you that such a statement made in front of medical professionals could be weaponized." "It was supposed to be a defensive measure," Rose roared, pacing his office like a caged animal. "A preemptive move, not something she would use to try and take my child from me." "A child she is currently carrying," Thorne reminded him gently. "The optics, Rose, are not in your favor. A wealthy, powerful man publicly questions the maternity of his pregnant wife. Now that same wife, represented by the most feared protector of women in New York, is claiming she needs to protect her unborn child from him. How do you think a judge will see that?" Rose stopped pacing the reality of his predicament crashing down on him. He had made a colossal error in judgment. He had underestimated Helen. He had viewed her as a gentle, calming influence in his life, forgetting the sharp mind and fierce will that lay beneath her quiet exterior. He had expected tears and arguments, followed by a reluctant acceptance of his vague explanations. He had not expected Harriet Cole. "What do I do?" Rose asked, his voice losing its arrogant bluster, replaced by a note of genuine desperation. "First, you will not contact her. No calls, no texts, no showing up at the penthouse. All communication will go through me," Thorne instructed. "Second, we file a response. We paint her as hysterical, emotionally overwrought, and easily manipulated. We will state that your comments were born of profound stress and concern, and have been twisted by a predatory lawyer into something they were not. We will offer a generous settlement, a co-parenting plan that is more than fair. We will make her look unreasonable." Rose listened, his mind already shifting from husband to strategist. It was damage control. He hated it. He was used to being on the offensive. "And Helen?" he asked. "How do I fix this with her?" "You may not be able to," Thorne said bluntly. "Rose, you triggered a primal fear in a mother. You can't unring that bell with logic or money. Our goal right now is not to save your marriage. It is to ensure you are not legally severed from your child's life. We fight fire with fire." Meanwhile, Helen was in a different kind of war room. Harriet Cole's office, overlooking the green expanse of Bryant Park, was surprisingly serene. It was decorated in shades of cream and grey, with orchids on the windowsill and modern art on the walls. It was designed to soothe, to give her clients a sense of calm and control. Harriet herself was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy Chanel suit, her grey hair cut in a sharp, elegant bob. Her eyes were her most formidable feature, intelligent, penetrating, and missing nothing. "He's been served," Harriet said, placing a folder on the glass desk between them. "His lawyer is Marcus Thorne, a worthy if predictable opponent. Thorne will try to paint you as erratic and emotional. He will try to buy you off." Helen nodded, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She had barely slept in 2 days, her nights filled with a rotating cast of nightmares. "He'll say he was protecting me," she said, her voice flat. "Of course he will," Harriet agreed. "Powerful men like your husband believe that control and protection are the same thing. They often are, until their interests and yours diverge. Our job is to prove that his actions were not protective, but threatening. That his statement was a calculated act of psychological cruelty intended to undermine your maternal rights." "It was," Helen whispered. "When I saw his face, it was like a mask dropped. I wasn't his wife in that moment. I was an obstacle." "Good," Harriet said, her gaze sharp. "Remember that feeling. That is what we need to convey to the court. Not anger, not hysteria. Just the cold, clear certainty of a mother who has seen a threat to her child." Harriet leaned forward. "Helen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any truth to his statement? Any ambiguity at all about the embryo transfer, the donor records? Anything Thorne will dig? We need to be prepared for whatever he might find." "No," Helen said without a moment's hesitation. "The egg donor was anonymous, selected through the most reputable agency in the country. The clinic was impeccable. The only ambiguity in that room was the one Rose created himself." "All right," Harriet said, satisfied with the conviction in Helen's voice. "Then we hold the line. He has made the first move in his game. You have made yours. Now we wait for his response. And Helen," she added, her voice softening slightly, "I want you to hire a private security detail, not Rose's men, your own. A man who behaves this unpredictably, who has this much to lose. We take no chances." The suggestion sent a chill down Helen's spine. The idea that she needed protection from Rose had seemed abstract, a legal position. Now it was becoming terrifyingly real. The battle was no longer just about custody papers and lawyers. It was about her safety. Her life was no longer her own. It was a contested territory. Life in the penthouse became a form of luxurious house arrest. Helen had followed Harriet Cole's advice, hiring a discreet security firm, Kroll Associates, known for protecting royalty and billionaires. A quiet, unassuming man named David now sat in her kitchen nursing cups of coffee and monitoring the building's security feeds on a tablet. His presence was both a comfort and a constant terrifying reminder of her new reality. Rose, true to his lawyer's instructions, kept his distance. There were no more calls. Instead, Marcus Thorne's office sent formal, chillingly impersonal emails to Harriet. They contained a counteroffer, a ridiculously generous divorce settlement that would leave Helen wealthier than she could ever have imagined, and a detailed co-parenting plan. It was a golden cage, baited with everything except an apology or an explanation. Helen, guided by Harriet, rejected it flatly. The issue wasn't money. It was trust and safety. Rose's response, filed with the court, was exactly as Harriet had predicted. It painted Helen as a beloved but fragile wife, her judgment clouded by pregnancy hormones. His statement at the clinic was reframed as a moment of acute anxiety stemming from their long and painful journey with infertility, a clumsy but well-intentioned verbal tic. It was masterful fiction designed to make her look like the unreasonable party. As the days turned into a week, a strange pattern began to emerge. David, her new head of security, called her into the kitchen one afternoon. His brow furrowed. "Mrs. Croft, I don't want to alarm you," he began, his voice low, "but we have a situation." He turned his tablet towards her. It showed a looped recording from a camera positioned across the street from their building near a small coffee shop. The footage showed a woman. She was standing on the corner, looking up towards the penthouse. She was striking with long, dark hair and a chic, expensive-looking trench coat. There was nothing overtly threatening about her, but her stillness was unsettling. She just stood there, for hours at a time, watching. "She's been there for 3 days straight," David explained. "Arrives around 9 a.m., leaves around 4 p.m. She doesn't talk to anyone. She just watches your building." "Is she a reporter?" Helen asked, her heart starting to beat a little faster. News of their separation had not yet leaked, but it was only a matter of time. "Doubtful," David said. "We ran a facial recognition search against media databases. Nothing. She's a ghost, but an expensive ghost. That coat is current season Burberry, the bag is a Bottega Veneta. She's not paparazzi." A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in Helen's stomach. This felt different. It was too personal. Rose was capable of many things: corporate espionage, ruthless negotiations. But this felt like a different kind of tactic. Too subtle, too strange. She immediately called Harriet. "A woman is watching my apartment," Helen said, her voice trembling slightly. "My security chief says she's been there for days." Harriet was silent for a moment. "Describe her," she said. Helen did, including David's observations about her expensive attire. "I don't like it," Harriet said, her voice tight. "It's classic psychological warfare, making you feel watched, paranoid. It's a way of controlling you from a distance. I'm going to authorize a full investigation. I'll hire a PI, someone off the books, to find out who she is. In the meantime, you don't leave the apartment without David. Is that clear?" The private investigator Harriet hired was a former NYPD detective named Frank Russo, a gruff, old-school operator who specialized in the dirty secrets of the 1%. Frank didn't rely on databases alone. He used shoe leather. For 2 days, Frank sat in his car watching the watcher. He took high-resolution photos, ran her license plate when she finally got into a late-model Audi, and tailed her to a discreet long-stay hotel in Soho. The Greenwich Hotel. Another haunt of the rich and famous. He learned she was checked in under the name S. Hayes, but the real breakthrough came from a different direction. Harriet, acting on a hunch, had asked Helen for every piece of information she had about their anonymous egg donor. The file from the fertility clinic was sparse, designed to protect the donor's identity. It contained her medical history, a summary of her education, a master's in Renaissance art history from the Courtauld Institute in London, her physical characteristics, dark hair, dark eyes, 5'8", and a single grainy black-and-white childhood photo. Harriet sent the file and the PI's photos of the mystery woman to a forensic analyst. The request was simple. Could these two people be the same person, 20 years apart? The call came late on a Friday night. Helen was in her nursery, rocking in the glider she had bought, dreaming of the baby who would soon fill the silent room. Her phone buzzed, and it was Harriet. Her voice was devoid of its usual professional calm. It was urgent, almost breathless. "Helen? Are you sitting down? Yes, what is it? Did you find out who she is?" "We did," Harriet said. The PI got a positive ID on the name from the hotel registry. S. Hayes. Her full name is Serafina Hayes. The name meant nothing to Helen. And the forensic analysis came back. Harriet continued, her voice tight. The childhood photo from the donor file. The photos of the woman outside your building. It's a definitive match. Serafina Hayes was your egg donor. Helen's mind reeled. The donor wasn't anonymous. She was here, watching her. But why? Why would she break her anonymity? Why is she watching me? There was a pause. When Harriet spoke again, her voice was grave. That's not the worst part, Helen. The PI did a deep background check on Serafina Hayes. It took some digging, but he found something. A society page announcement from 6 years ago. An engagement. Helen held her breath, a sense of horrifying inevitability washing over her. She was engaged to be married. Harriet said, her voice soft but clear. To Rose Croft. The world tilted on its axis. Helen dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, but she didn't hear it. Her mind was a kaleidoscope of fractured images. Rose's face at the ultrasound, his cold certainty. She's not the real Mum. The legal ambiguity he wanted to create. The woman with the dark hair, watching, waiting. She's not the real Mum. He wasn't talking about Helen. He was talking about Serafina. The donor. His ex-fiancée. The woman who was supposed to be a ghost in the machine of their child's creation was real. And Rose had known it all along. The entire foundation of her pregnancy, her child, was not just a lie, but a meticulously constructed deception with Rose at its center. The PI's final chilling discovery came an hour later, relayed through a shell-shocked Harriet. Serafina Hayes, according to every public record, had died 5 years ago. She was reported lost at sea after Rose's yacht. The Serenity sank in a sudden storm off the coast of Sardinia. The woman watching her apartment wasn't just Rose's ex-fiancé and their baby's biological mother. She was a ghost. The revelation did not bring Helen to her knees. It forged her spine into steel. The grief and confusion that had plagued her for weeks were burned away by the white-hot oven of righteous fury. The game had changed. This was no longer a divorce proceeding. It was an excavation, and she was determined to unearth every last one of Rose's buried lies. Armed with the PI's report, a dossier filled with grainy surveillance photos, hotel receipts, and a copy of a 5-year-old obituary, Helen did not call Harriet. She did not call her security guard. She did something Rose would never have anticipated. She called him, directly breaking the lawyer-imposed silence. He answered on the first ring, his voice wary. "Helen, my apartment. 1 hour." She said, her voice devoid of any emotion but a chilling command. "Come alone, Rose. No lawyers. You and me. It's time for you to tell me the truth." She hung up before he could respond. She spent the next hour preparing. David, her security guard, was instructed to remain in the kitchen, out of sight but ready. She had him disable the microphones in the living room, the ones she now knew Rose had installed, but to keep the cameras active, streaming to a secure cloud server that only she and Harriet could access. She placed the PI's file in the center of the coffee table. Then she sat on the sofa, her posture perfect, her hands resting on her belly, and she waited. The elevator chimed at precisely the 59-minute mark. Rose walked in his face, a mixture of apprehension and relief. He had a bouquet of white peonies, her favorite, in his hand, a pathetic olive branch. "Helen, I'm so glad you called." He began moving towards her. "Don't," she said, her voice stopping him in his tracks. "Sit." She gestured to the armchair opposite her. He hesitated, then placed the flowers awkwardly on a side table and sat down, perching on the edge of the seat like a defendant. "You wanted to create a legal ambiguity, Rose," she began, her voice as cool and clear as glass. "You wanted it on record that I wasn't the real Mom. I think it's time you tell me who you think the real Mom is." He flinched. "Helen, it was a mistake. I was under pressure. Stop lying." She cut him off. Her voice sharp as a razor. "The lies end now." She gestured to the file on the table. "Her name is Serafina Hayes. She's staying at the Greenwich Hotel. She wears a Burberry trench coat and has been watching this building for a week. She was also, according to this, your fiancé. And most interestingly, she was our egg donor." The color drained from Rose's face. He looked at the file, then back at Helen, his carefully constructed composure shattering like spun glass. He looked for the first time since this ordeal began truly terrified. "How?" he stammered. "That doesn't matter," Helen said, pressing her advantage. "What matters is that you lied to me from the very beginning. You let me believe our donor was anonymous. You let me believe she was a stranger. But she wasn't. Was she? You chose her. You chose your ex-fiancée to be the biological mother of my child." He slumped back in the chair, the fight going out of him. He buried his face in his hands. "Yes," he admitted, his voice muffled. "I chose her." "Why?" Helen demanded. "Why would you do that? Why would you tie us to a woman from your past?" He looked up. His eyes filled with a desperate, haunted look she had never seen before. "Because I believed she was dead." And then the whole sordid, twisted story came tumbling out. Serafina Hayes hadn't just been his fiancée. She had been his obsession, and he hers. Their relationship was a whirlwind of passion and toxicity. She was beautiful, brilliant, and deeply unstable. "She had a darkness in her, Helen," Rose said, his voice ragged. "A possessiveness that was all-consuming. She saw me not as a partner, but as a possession. My success, my company. She wanted to meld with it, to control it." The engagement had been her ultimatum. But as the wedding approached, her behavior grew more erratic, her paranoia more pronounced. She accused him of constant infidelities, threatened his business partners, and created scenes that threatened the stable, powerful image he had so carefully cultivated. He had tried to end it, but she had threatened to destroy him, to fabricate stories for the press that would ruin his reputation and tank his company's stock. The yachting trip to Sardinia was supposed to be a final attempt at reconciliation, but a violent argument had erupted. A storm had rolled in with terrifying speed. In the chaos, she went overboard. The Italian Coast Guard searched for days. They found debris, a life preserver, but no body. She was declared legally dead. "I was relieved." Rose admitted the confession, tasting like ash in his mouth. "It was a horrible, tragic thing, but it was also a release. I was free of her." Years passed. He met Helen the calm after Serafina's storm. Their life was peaceful, stable, but the infertility diagnosis had gnawed at him. He was a man who built legacies, and he was facing the end of his line. One day, he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "I was looking through old files, and I found it. Years before we met, when Serafina and I were still happy, we had visited a fertility clinic. We were young, not ready for kids. but she was obsessed with the idea of preserving her legacy. She had eggs frozen. It was all under a pseudonym, a precaution she insisted on. When he and Helen decided to use a donor, a dark, desperate idea took root in his mind. He still had the access codes to the cryogenic facility in Switzerland. He could use Serafina's eggs. He would have a biological child, a continuation of his own story in a way. He rationalized it as harmless. Serafina was gone. No one would ever know. It was a perfect secret solution. It was my way of having a child that was biologically mine in some sense, he said, without telling you the truth, because I knew you'd be horrified. It was selfish. It was monstrous. But I believed it was a harmless lie. The lie held until 2 months ago. He had received an email. A single sentence I hear: "We're having a baby." Serafina was alive. She hadn't drowned. She had been picked up by a fishing trawler, had a breakdown, and had spent years in a private clinic in France under a different name, recovering from what she claimed was amnesia. But her memory had returned, and she had been watching him, waiting. She had found out about Helen, about the pregnancy. "She wants money, Rose," Helen asked, her voice cold. "She wants everything," he said, his voice breaking. "She doesn't want money. She wants the life she thinks I stole from her. She wants you gone, and she wants the baby. She sees this child as hers and hers alone. She's been blackmailing me for weeks, threatening to go to the press to tell the world that I used her eggs without her consent, that you are just a surrogate carrying her child." Suddenly, his actions at the ultrasound snapped into focus. It wasn't an attack on Helen. It was a desperate, panicked defense against Serafina. "You said she's not the real mum, hoping to discredit me." Helen pieced it together, her voice filled with horrified understanding. "So that if Serafina came forward, you'd already planted the idea that I wasn't the mother anyway. You were trying to create chaos to muddy the waters so you could fight her." "Yes," he whispered, defeated. "It was a crazy, stupid plan. I panicked. I saw the image of the baby on the screen, and all I could think about was her coming to take it away. I thought if I created doubt about your maternity, I could somehow protect you, protect the baby from her claim. I never imagined you would think that I was talking about you." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Helen, I know I have destroyed everything. I lied to you in the most unforgivable way. But everything I have done since finding out she was alive has been to protect that child. Our child." The room was silent save for the hum of the city far below. The truth was finally out, and it was more monstrous, more complex than Helen could ever have imagined. Her husband wasn't a simple villain. He was a fool, a liar, a man who had made a catastrophic pact with his own past and dragged her into the fallout. And the woman watching from the street wasn't just a ghost. She was a predator, and she was coming for Helen's baby. The custody battle she had started against Rose was now meaningless. They were facing a war on a completely different front, against a threat she was only just beginning to understand. The confession hung in the air, thick and toxic. Helen felt a strange, dizzying vertigo. The man she was meant to be fighting was now her only ally against a far greater threat. The neat lines of her legal battle had dissolved into a messy, terrifying reality. "She wants to meet Rose," said his voice low, after showing Helen the chilling messages from Serafina. "All three of us. She wants to negotiate the terms of the handover." A primal protective instinct surged through Helen. "No," she said, her voice like flint. "We are not negotiating my child's life. We have to see her." Rose insisted, desperation on his face. Let her think she has the upper hand. My lawyer can't find a weakness. To fight her, we have to understand her." Helen looked at Rose at the broken man in her living room and made a decision. She would not be a pawn in his disastrous game any longer. She would become a queen. She took control, instructing her own security head, David, to arrange the meeting with tactical precision. She called Harriet Cole. "The opposition has changed, Harriet," she said simply. "The petition against my husband is on hold. We have a new target." The meeting was set for the following afternoon in a private suite at the Baccarat Hotel Neutral Ground, chosen for its opulent privacy. Helen wore a simple, dark blue dress, the fabric draping over her now very prominent belly. She felt the baby move a steady, reassuring kick. She was not walking into this room as Rose Croft's wife. She was walking in as a mother. Serafina Hayes was already there, a striking silhouette against the Manhattan skyline. She smiled when she saw them, a slow, predatory curve of her lips. "Rose," she purred, ignoring Helen completely. "You look tired," Serafina Rose said, his voice tight. "And this must be the vessel," Serafina said, her eyes finally flicking to Helen, dismissing her in a single cruel glance. "You've taken good care of my baby." "He is not your baby," Helen stated, her voice calm and firm. "You provided the genetic material. That is where your involvement ends. I am his mother." Serafina laughed, a low, theatrical sound. "Oh, darling, you are a walking incubator with delusions of grandeur. You have no rights here. This is a conversation between me and the man who stole from me." She turned her full menacing attention to Rose. "The deal is simple. Amend the birth certificate to list me as mother. A $10 billion trust fund. And she," Serafina gestured vaguely at Helen, "will sign away all parental rights and disappear. Refuse, and your legacy is obliterated." Rose was trapped, checkmated by his past. But Helen was not. "You seem to be under a misapprehension, Serafina." Helen said, her voice cutting through the tension as she stepped forward. From her handbag, she pulled a thin file and placed it on the table. "While you were playing the ghost, my lawyers were a little more productive. This is a sworn affidavit from the facility in Bern, where your eggs were stored. It details how you defaulted on storage payments for 3 years. It includes the facility's policy which you signed, stating that any material left in arrears for over 24 months is considered abandoned property." Serafina's confident smirk faltered. "When Rose acquired that material, Helen continued, her voice gaining strength. He wasn't stealing from you. He was legally acquiring abandoned property from the facility. The eggs you think are your golden ticket. You gave them up for the price of a few missed payments years ago." She pushed a second document across the table. "This is a preemptive injunction filed this morning, asserting my sole maternal rights based on gestation. It includes a restraining order against you for harassment and extortion. It also includes this." She tapped the first file as evidence that your genetic claim is legally void. Serafina stared at the documents, her face pale, the mask of malice crumbling to reveal the desperate woman beneath. And finally, Helen said, "Delivering the killing blow, my husband's company has one of the most advanced cybersecurity divisions in the world. When you sent him that first email, you left a tiny digital fingerprint. It led them right to that private clinic in France, a clinic specializing in personality disorders, currently under investigation for financial fraud. How do you think a judge will view the claims of a woman who faked her own death and has a documented history of institutionalization?" Serafina was speechless, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the papers to Rose, and then to Helen. In Helen's calm gaze, she finally saw not a vessel, but an unbreakable wall. Her power, an illusion, built on a lie, was gone. With a strangled cry of fury, she snatched the files and stormed from the room. In the silence, Rose looked at Helen with profound awe and shame. She had done what he and his powerful lawyers couldn't. She had vanquished the monster from his past. "Helen," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. Her mind was clear. "You didn't save me, Rose. I saved myself, and I saved my son." Their marriage was over. There was no going back. "My petition for sole custody stands," she told him quietly. "I will be our son's primary guardian. You will not contest it. You will provide for him, you can see him, but the decisions about his life and safety will be mine. Your judgment has proven to be catastrophic." He nodded slowly, accepting his penance without argument. "Our lawyers can handle the rest," Helen said, turning to leave. She paused at the door, her presence filling the room. "You set this fire, Rose, but I will be the one to decide what grows from the ashes." She walked out of the suite and into the hallway where David was waiting, leaving her husband alone to reckon with the ruins of the world he had built. In the end, Helen's story wasn't about the fairy tale life she lost, but the incredible strength she found. She faced the ultimate betrayal not with hysteria, but with a cold, clear strategy, proving that the most formidable power isn't wealth or influence, but a mother's will to protect her child. While Rose's lies shattered their marriage, they were forced to build a new reality from the wreckage, a fragile truce centered on the son they both loved. Helen emerged not as a victim, but as a warrior who had stared down ghosts and demons, both real and imagined, and won. Her journey is a raw, gripping reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you truly are. If this story of love, lies, and a mother's unbreakable bond captivated you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story of true strength. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama.